Hi Lee, thanks very much for joining us. For those people who don't know who you are, give us a little bit about your background, both as an athlete and as a coach.
Well, g'day Dan, first off, and welcome as well to to just getting amongst a little bit more of a connection. I think this is brilliant what you're doing, so I'd like
Thanks,
to
mate.
really start by saying that. I guess background for myself, I'd really like to start in, from athlete perspective of where I sort of come up and what really brought me into what I'm doing now. Started off more back in the day, sort of late teens in triathlons and so forth, getting that little bit of a combination. Quite focused and structured in that sort of stuff, and then tendency to essentially overtrain and then not train for a while in between, and then miss different events and so forth. Then crossing that with cross country and so forth as well, and then at that point of sort of not really enjoying it because it was too much focus on training and so forth. So yeah, that sort of took me more into like surfing, skating, snowboarding, more of that just like really unfocused style, but it's really using the body to more specifics and just having the joy with it.
Nice one.
And then sort of later down the track, really coming back into more sort of my coaching and trainer career, kicking off, moving back into a little bit of starting out with bodybuilding and so forth. Experimenting with recomp and how I could change the structure of my body and so forth from an aesthetic perspective. Which kind of led into like wanting to get more into the performance side of that. So moving a little bit of powerlifting stuff, the big three and so forth. Didn't end up ever, competing with it or anything, but just, more learning about how I could train the body and so forth. And then that sort of led into a bit of a back injury with, just loading too much and, still with good form, but not sort of realizing how you've got to load, and then sort of essentially learn about the deload phases that are really relevant there. And that really brought me to coming back in from a movement perspective, and then understanding how mapping the body from a lot of different formats and the ways of sort of getting those structures to define and redefine through movement was really effective. And then I mix it up now with a bit of everything these days. So and keeping that as a bit of a thing that I want to do for the rest of my life. So from a coaching perspective, started in S&C, and very, very relative to my own personal experience, just looking at athletes and team stuff, and just how that we've kind of come through that era where it was really all focused, like our testing and everything was always about strength and speed, and just looking at some of those other metrics that go into how we can test our body from neurally to fascial sort of stability and so forth. So that's kind of where I really set myself now, is learning about as much as I can about the fascial system.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you have a really varied background, and sometimes you have to go through that, and you have to go through the injuries to work out how the body works and to work out how to fix them. And it's an unfortunate process. You have to wade through all that before you can get to what you should have been doing 20 years earlier. So you mentioned in there a real interest in the fascial stuff. Can you talk to me about how this stuff works, or sort of define your area of specialization, I guess, there? And because a lot of the people who will be listening or watching this will be CrossFit athletes, how do you think this area of specialization is going to relate to the CrossFit athlete?
Well, fascia, it's really integral through our entire system. It's the biggest organ, if you want to refer to it as an organ, and it is. And it basically interacts and permeates through every other part of our body. I guess the area of the real specialization that we're working in conjunction, obviously myself and Blackroll, is to then take that on an educational outcome so that people can actually visualize it, understand how that is layered into some of the other systems within our body that we're maybe more aware of, like our neuromuscular system, etc. And then how that the metrics of that are really relate to that neuromuscular element. So fascial system could be known as our stability system. So one of its biggest functions, if you would look at it from a macro sort of function, is stability. So it enables our body to be in a tensegrity sort of style model where we have in uprightness. We can move through different movement outcomes without actually sort of the force or the force production is taken and offset in the wrong direction. So essentially in that mitigating injuries. And then also on that one, sort of landing mechanics and so forth are all involved and integrated into the fascial system by way of better communication. of those systems absorbing force.
Right.
So I think those are the areas then, if we're looking at that, probably more to the point of like SMT, self-myofascial techniques, which is a big part of what we educate and practice in, is actually then being able to listen to the body on and using a sort of a real quite fast-paced self-care practice that you'd implement in your day, whether it's as an alternative component to your training or as part of, it can be plugged into training as a intra, or even as a post, of then listening to your body, working out where there's possibly dysfunction or inhibition going on, even through the movement phase of training, and then come back and actually work specifically and directly on that area to then move back into a movement outcome. So it's very sort of different to sort of stretching and so forth, which is all part that we need, as part of an overall practice. But I think SMT is not, specifically stretching and lengthening the fibers. It's more about getting communication into specific areas, similar to a sports massage, but when it's your self-care practice, you know exactly where to go because it's your own body and you're listening to it.
So if we were looking for the sort of lowest hanging fruit, I guess what I'm chasing is, what is the smallest amount of work or the lowest hanging fruit that a CrossFit athlete could take on board to get as much benefit as possible? I mean, what's the 80-20 rule of this? What's the single biggest thing that you think a CrossFit athlete would neglect and that they could incorporate from this style of recovery?
Yeah, well, I'm going in CrossFit, boxes regularly myself, and sort of having a few mates that are great CrossFit coaches. I know what the dynamics of CrossFit looks like, and it's that environment is very much it's on a bit more of a competitive style role. The development of it was about how many can we do on this particular day and so forth, which I love. But that can be, this is generically speaking, I guess, as well, can be a little bit sometimes extrinsic in the way that it's structured, and especially with programming. So I guess the point of self-care is to sort of start to bring that back into a little bit of an intrinsic sort of sense of your body and your training, and listen to it and adjust accordingly. I think that small amount of SMT that you can do on your body it creates a massive understanding of what your body's talking to you about when there's maybe a pain in the knee that day, or whatever else it could be, your grip strength starting to sort of taper off. Listening to those things rather than before they become an injury, and just sort of taking those early warnings, those early signals from our body.
Do you think that the fact that CrossFit has turned exercising into a competitive thing, there's almost a gamification of fitness there? Do you think the sort of people that CrossFit attracts and the sort of people that they probably build within a CrossFit affiliate environment, do you think it's hard to get those sort of people to prioritize their recovery because they're so used to everything having measurable outcomes? I came first, second, third on this, all very ranking based, all very gamified. Is there a way that we can get this psyche of athlete spending more time on their recovery? Or B, maybe to meet in the middle, is there a way that some of these techniques that you're talking about could be gamified, not necessarily to rank, I'm better than you at doing my recovery work, but is there a way we can turn it into a game to encourage this sort of mentality to recover?
Absolutely. Just one that popped in my head now when you were saying is like, how long can we go without injury or dysfunction in our body?
Perfect. Yeah.
The person with the least amount of injuries and dysfunction wins. If you want to put it into that sort of a game sort of outcome, I think at the end of the day, like that small amount, just a real small increment that has to be, input into the way that we look at our body and the function that it is, that would have a massive difference on the way that you then train it and even compete. I think that element of competition, it's brilliant because it's our survival. It's eat or be eaten sort of style. And so it is very primal within our basis of human sort of anatomy, if you will. But in that process was very little about long-term survival. So I think with the changing world we're living in now, it's like we're wanting to live longer. We're wanting to move right through till we actually do, die or whatever. But, I think that part of having a good functioning body through that whole entire thing, rather than just a short-term 2 years, I was great, and then looking back at photos and wishing you were still doing it and reminiscing, but like being 80, 90, 100 and still doing, competition, still doing, some of my inspirations, runners that, start running when they're 55, and then, by 85, they're hitting PBs that they've never done before. So they're some of the people that I really, really get inspired by, because it's a lifetime of movement.
Have you read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg?
I haven't read that one, no.
All
but I've read a few other really good books that were sort of directly in relation to a lot of that style of, the survival of the fittest stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, just looking at that by Mike Stroud. So it's a brilliant book, and some, so I think similar context.
Yeah, he talks about, there's a guy who went in as a new CEO of Alcoa. And they expect the CEO to go in and shake up the systems and shake up the corporate side of things. And his big focus was, he said, let's try and cut down the number of injuries in the workplace to zero. So obviously this is a high injury rate workplace, because there's a lot of heavy and light industrial stuff. And everyone was saying, well, surely we need to shake up the board and change the staff. He said, no, let's just focus on this and use this as a keystone habit. And
I love that. That's
and the sort of signs that they have up in there, it's been 10 days since our last serious injury. And they were going from measuring this in days to measuring this in months or years. And I think it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about there. What he's done in this case is to have gamified these injury rates and said, well, it's a challenge. Let's see how far we can go. And maybe the focus that we can take with athletes who are type A personality, I want to win, I want to go heavier, more reps, less time, is, as you say, turn this into, I haven't been injured in X days, weeks, months, years, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And then, putting that together with the performance, the easily measurable ones like speed and power and so forth. That would be, the metrics of that would be exciting to see in the CrossFit industry. Yeah. So
I think sometimes we need to meet people in the middle instead of saying, this is how it needs to be done. You need to be spending X minutes a day doing this. So
absolutely.
Is there an existing habit that we can build into already? And I think that sort of brings me to the next question. In terms of programming, because obviously a lot of CrossFit athletes, they almost have this mentality where, all right, I'm doing all this programming. If I need to get better at something else, I need to put that on top and then more on top. And their view of efficiency is how much can we get done. I think probably a better view of efficiency is how much can we take away and still get all of that benefit. So if we go out to people and say, all right, you need to add on this powerlifting, this extra gymnastics work, this extra release work, working on your fascia, more on top and more on top and more, and it gets to a point where either they're overtraining, they're doing too much, or they lose the ability mentally to do it. So how do you think a CrossFit athlete who's already training almost at peak volume, how can they incorporate more of this sort of recovery work into their training without just adding volume on top of volume on top of volume?
So possibly in the box format, as in, so when you were in a CrossFit facility and you were training in that outcome, then looking at how you would input that between. So on your rest phase, you would actually be inputting SMT into your actual system, or plugging into that fascial system.
Perfect.
And using the reps as the actual listening to the body as you're doing the reps. So yes, doing the reps, and obviously adapting the neuromuscular system, but looking at how the body is feeling throughout that. And the more you tap into it, the body, like the fascial system alone is 10 times more sensitive, just because of the neural endings through it, than the muscular system. So when we feel any pain within the body, it's generally felt in the fascial system. So that once you start plugging into that connection, then it's obviously, it's when we're moving, if you're conscious of it, you can actually get a read on things that are not working as you're moving.
Cool.
And then that way you can then directly go to that area and work on it, or the more you learn about it, relating to the fact that you might be having referral in one area, but it's relating to something else. And that kind of ties back in to when we were chatting earlier about the I guess, looking at the fascial anatomy of the body and getting a visual, a basic visual on some of those connecting lines that run through our body, that intercept and envelope muscular system. And then once we can visualize them, we can then sort of think of pain or discomfort within the body, or compensation. You can actually start to feel it while you actually are moving.
Cool. I really like the concept you're talking about there of incorporating it in between sets, because then it's not adding time. It's only going to help with your next sets. Can you give a practical real world example of something? Let's say an athlete is doing 5 sets of 5 heavy back squats. They're having a 3-minute rest in between sets.
Uh-huh.
What's something that the people listening to this could take away and incorporate? So what would you do exactly between those sets of 5 in that 3 minutes?
Yeah, so I look at what's happening through back squats. So we're compressing, we're loading the spine as much as we're loading the rest of the system. So compression to the spine to maximize that in the rest phase would be mobilizing the spine. So mobilizing the spine, you can roll through the middle of the back, sort of starting at the lower thoracic, right up through into the the cervical spine at the top of the very top near the neck, and utilizing that sort of some movements through when we will be actually doing some of this at the camp. So I'm excited to sort of share some of these, but actually mobilize. It's a real simple 3 or 4 part mobilization technique that can incorporate many different forms of movement through different planes, mobilizing the spine, getting better communication through the neural structures, but also deloading some of those fibers that may have become super loaded or highly contracted through that through that phase of loading.
Great,
that is back squats.
Yeah, I like it. It's a good way to be spending the same amount of time in the gym, the same amount of training time, and yet getting a lot more benefit out of it. So I think that's something that people can definitely apply.
Yeah.
If someone was to say to you, all right, I've got 5 minutes a day. That's all the time I'm going to spend on this.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do in that 5 minutes? So if people listening here, they're saying, yeah, I want to just get a little bit of a taste of it. I'm not going all in. I'm not going to go hardcore with this. If there's only one thing I was going to be doing for 5 minutes a day, what would that thing be?
Would be just implementing a breathe practice.
Yep.
To start off, just literally unplugging for a minute, no music, or if there is music, so that you're creating your own sort of setting for your body. Incorporate a minute or so of breathing and just check in. So check in with your body from the tips of your toes, working up through, just literally giving your body that time to just actually communicate with you. Like we get so unplugged from it and then we're pushing it to do this like it's some sort of car or machine. When it's very much in that sense of we're part of this structure and that we sort of disconnect from. So just having that bit of time to have connection to the body, listen to maybe where there's areas of dysfunction or, that maybe inhibitions that are relevant and present through a bit of a pain or a tingling sensation, referral, etc. And then utilizing the rest of the time to maybe work on those areas.
Yeah, I think it's really good advice. I mean, it covers a few things. It ticks a few boxes there. Firstly, it's our self-awareness, which I think is drastically undervalued and also drastically underachieved from people in like how am I feeling? How am I feeling physically and psychologically? But also that almost putting you in a state where it's encouraging boredom. It's encouraging you to go into that space of static or white space where your mind can go away from the I'm focused 100% on what I'm doing and actually be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like, it's like thinking. You need a level of focused thinking and you need you need an element of unfocused.
Yeah.
If you're not incorporating both, then one's going to get drained. So, having that time for the body kind of to do the same. And, I really think that time, just getting a moment to breathe, we may not be running marathons up to the moment we start training, but, we could have been in a highly stressful day and appointments and so forth. So in our mind, we've run a marathon already that day. So looking at a load perspective on the nervous system, we're coming into training already completely loaded and worn out.
Yeah.
So having that moment is actually a really good time just to check in with something like along those lines, just as an example.
Yeah.
And then adjust your training that day accordingly. And I think that's the exciting part of that is a lot of the new modern style S&C within some of the say more team. Top tier, like, rugby and so on, is part of building that. And they used to have a section over here for prehab. And, a lot of people are like, well, I don't get injured. I don't need to do the prehab. So, finding that, bringing that as part of the training and it also as a bit of a check-in for the individual athletes on each day and each loading phase.
Yeah, I like it. A bit of a change of directions. I know you've got a lot of background in a lot of varied sports, and aside from the recovery stuff we've mainly talked about, you do have a pretty extensive background in extreme board sports, endurance, strength work. What I would like to know from you is if you were in charge of designing an event for the CrossFit Games, so this is your opportunity to put together an event to challenge the fittest people on earth, focused on your background or your sort of areas of specialisation, what would that event look like? How would you test these guys?
Yeah, I like a few things pop straight to mind, but yeah, I still feel like the fittest person is really relative. Like, so the metrics of that would be quite interesting to see where that went. But some things I think would be brilliant. Like, you know, obviously I'm very much into my back flips and back tucks and so forth, just from the few elements that it brings and how you have to have that complete stabilized system. You're off the mark, speed, power, and full muscular recruitment's all there, but the fascial integrity that goes along with it. But then the spatial elements, so just being able to understand where your body is in space. It's similar. I feel it sometimes, like when you get, when you're surfing, you get slammed by a massive wave and you're underwater and you're not knowing exactly where you are. Having that feeling of knowing where the surface of the water is sort of, I feel that sometimes doing back tuck. So I think incorporating something along those lines where there's not fatigue, you have to do so many backflips, but you have to perform a singular, clean, perfect form backflip or
it's
back
a skill
tuck.
test. Yeah,
exactly. And also as a check-in along the way, so between rounds and so forth. Another thing I'd love to see is just different surfaces incorporated. So maybe dry sand, as one of the surfaces at some of these, because then that challenges the body on a different form of stabilization, fatigue.
Right, I like it.
And it's bringing that more completeness to, it can be very easily input into a scenario there. And I think I've seen a few games with the use of some dry sand stuff in there. So I think, that would be two that I would definitely would be great to see.
I like it. It's definitely something that there's a trickle down effect from the events that are programmed at the CrossFit Games. Something is programmed, and then right through the grassroots level of the community, people go, oh, okay, this is on the table, we need to practice this. So if they start swimming, everyone starts swimming. If they start cycling, everyone starts cycling. So I think all you need is just to chuck this sort of stuff in there once, and very quickly people will jump on board that and it'll trickle through. And it's got the power to change the training of hundreds of thousands of people. So, yeah, I like the ideas.
Absolutely.
Cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah. Now, in a couple of months, obviously depending on when people are listening to this, we're lucky enough to have you coming on board as one of our subject matter experts at our athlete camp in September. What sort of stuff can the attendees expect from you in the module that you'll be presenting, and what's the biggest or the main takeaway that they will have to make them better CrossFitters?
So we'll take a quick little journey into the fascial system, some of the areas that have been mapped by some, the professionals like anatomy trains and others like Robert Schleip and so forth, and really then putting that into a form that can be visualized, so that the athlete could then take it away when they are moving and training, start to visualize those lines. And then we will be working also on some SMT, so some practice elements of some of those techniques and where to implement them using the different Blackroll tools that we have available.
Excellent, mate. I can't wait. I know I'm going to learn a lot from you, and I'm sure the rest of our attendees will as well. Before we say goodbye, any way that people can get in touch with you if they have questions? How can people follow you online, social media? What's good?
Yeah, so definitely get around Blackroll Australia. We've got some amazing content that's going up there regularly on a day-to-day basis. My own personal work is sustainable human movement. So go and jump on there and have a follow. It's some ramblings plus a little bit of fun and games. So I like to be quite experimental on there and just get a bit of feedback. So I'm always up for hearing different sort of inputs and comments, because I think that's part of how we all get better and how we can then practice as a completeness.
Great stuff, mate. Excellent. Is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with? Any takeaways before we say goodbye?
Try to implement 2 minutes of breathing each day and check in with your body.
Excellent stuff. Leigh, thank you very much for your time. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else will too. And
looking forward to being there, Dan.
Absolutely, mate. Look forward to it.